Welcome to this session. This is getting the most out of your Lync monitoring service data. This session is really designed to talk about what the monitoring server is and the type of data that you can get from it. My name is Nick Smith. I am a member of the customer engineering team in the Lync product group, where we focus on working with kind of our largest and most difficult or challenging deployments. And really what you're going to see in today's session is some lessons that we've learned and educational things that we've done with these customers to help them understand the type of data that gets collected in monitoring and how to use that data to answer some of their questions around quality and adoption.
And my name is Scott Soberfield. I'm on the same team as Nick, and he's actually my manager. So don't challenge me with any really too difficult questions, because put me on the spot. No, I'm kidding. It's a small group today, so feel free to have it be as interactive as possible. If you guys have any questions, we'll repeat them back. I'm on the same team as Nick. I'm in customer engineering. I've been at Microsoft 8 years now. Last couple of years in the Lync product group. So again, with Nick, we've got some experience working with customers. Some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today is, some real world stories that we've seen with our customers that we kind of want to share with you guys to help you understand. We had some questions yesterday. We're not covering SCOM. I mean, that's a whole, session in and of itself. So this is more focused on the data that's in the monitoring service database and kind of what you can do with it. So, all right. So, what's this slide mean? Right? We're showing a doctor. The concept here is, can you really fix a problem before you've diagnosed a problem? So one of the common things that we hear from customers that when Nick and I or our team get engaged is, we're having a lot of problems. We can't quite get our hand on where the problems are occurring, how frequently they're occurring. We're kind of hearing ad hoc from people that they're having issues, but we don't know, is it systematic? Is it just a one-off? Is it one day? Is it 1 week? Whatever. And so the first thing that we always say to these customers is, well, have you deployed the monitoring service? Well, no. What's that? Okay, so how can you actually diagnose a problem, how can you actually fix a problem before you've diagnosed it? And so what this monitoring service data does for you is kind of gives you that basis for the diagnosis, right? So it's it's kind of equivalent to you go into your doctor and you say to your doctor, hey, give me drug X, Y, and Z. Well, they're not going to just do that, right? They're going to ask you what's wrong. What part of your body hurts? It's my elbow. What hurts with it? What happened? What's the history? What's your, have you ever had elbow pain before? They're going to ask you all these kinds of questions. And the data that's in the monitoring service database can help you answer those questions. So our objectives today, we're going to go through some of the fundamentals of the monitoring service, where the data gets collected, where it gets stored, how it gets processed, and then we'll get into sort of the intelligence of that data, so how you can use it to answer deployment questions, troubleshoot, that kind of thing. And then we'll talk briefly at the end about some things that are outside the built-in reports. I think I saw some of the call quality methodology posters in backpacks too. So this is kind of, I guess, would augment that session. I mean, the call quality session is really just focused on getting real deep on the call quality methodology, whereas this is maybe a little bit kind of higher level and more overall in terms of the data that's in there.
So we want to start off with what the monitoring service components are. I'm calling it a monitoring service because previously we had a monitoring server. How many of you have Lync 2013 deployed? Okay, how many have 2010 deployed? Okay, so if you have 2010, you've got the Lync monitoring server. 2013 has all been kind of co-located. The end result is the same. The way in which it's achieved is a little bit different. But really what I wanted to show you is kind of how all the data gets collected, all the different components that help you to understand this. And the first place to look is clients. If you look at the diagram that I have up here, you can see a whole bunch of different clients, users, external users, servers, MCUs. And you can see all these different colleagues that may be happening depicted by the red lines. One thing to keep in mind is that when we're collecting all this information and we want to know about quality, we want to know about quality at the user endpoint. We want to know what their perceived experience is, or what our prediction of their experience is. And then we also need to know the same at the termination point of all those media streams. So all those clients are actually going to be collecting information about their call quality. And you can see all these different endpoints in which we're going to be having that data. Once a call ends, the clients are all going to send this data back to the server as part of what we call a voice quality report. We'll get into that in just a moment. When it sends all this data back to the server is then able to take it and kind of aggregate it and then place the data into the respective databases, whether it be the CDR database for call detail records or the QoE metrics database that talks about the quality of your media experience.
Yep. So on the last slide, Nick showed the client endpoints that are collecting data. So we get questions, a lot. How does that client actually figure out what the media quality is, and how does it actually report it back to the server? So one of the things that you'll see is if you were to look at a trace log on the client side, is as soon as that call is done, while the call is going on, the client is collecting all of these metrics in terms of, jitter, packet loss, all sorts of things. The device drivers that were being used, collects all this data, takes it and puts it in a voice quality report, and it ships it off to the front-end server. I'm not there yet. Hold on. It's getting a little jumpy on my slide. So we then take that, so the client then takes that and hands it off to the front-end server. And then on the front-end server, there's this component called the Universal Data Collection Agent. And the Universal Data Collection Agent, literally think of it as kind of a monitor of all data that's passing across the front-end server. So say all the data is passing across the front-end server, the UDC agent is looking at every message that goes across that front-end server, and it picks out messages that it thinks are important that it should then store into the databases. And it takes it and goes, oh, message, shuffle, message, shuffle, message, shuffle. Oh, I don't need that one, let that one go. And it basically takes all these messages and it queues them up in the local database called the LYSS database, L-Y-S-S. And the reason why we do that is so that we're very efficient in how we process those messages on the front-end server. We don't want to have to wait to actually insert them into a back-end database. We want to just process them really quickly, and we kind of store them in the LYSS database, and then the LYSS database, as it has time to process, actually inserts them into the monitoring databases. So if you were really kind of eager, like later this afternoon, and you wanted to jump into your labs and learn more about this, it's a joke. Come on, it's a joke. I know we're all going to do that this afternoon. No. So if you, in the future, wanted to do this, you could go on a front-end server, turn on Lync server logging, and log for the UDC agent component. And that's the screenshot that we're showing you there. Is a message that's being parsed by that UDC agent inserted into the database. And what this does is this evaluates all these SIP messages, like I said, for more than just the voice quality report. It looks at things like registrations, any response codes that are passed back and forth, any diagnostic codes, meeting events, things like that. And it stores it into the LCS CDR database, and then you can go back after and report on it. And this slide here kind of talks about how we collect that data. The screenshot on the right-hand side actually shows a sample of a voice quality report that gets sent by the client. So if you're looking in your client logs, you can just search for the string VQ report, and you'll actually get this XML blob. It won't be kind of nice and pretty and formatted like this in the actual snooper trace, but you can copy out that whole XML blob into an XML file and then open it in your favorite XML editor. Like I said on the last slide, it basically takes this report, sends it up to the server, and we insert it into the QoE database. So we have the QoE metrics and LCS CDR databases schemas documented on TechNet, and I think the link is in the appendix of this deck if you need it. So we get questions a lot. Well, the data that's in the reports, the out-of-box reports, is nice, but I want to figure out how to actually go and write my own SQL queries. Do we have any SQL developers in the room? T-SQL experts? Okay, the guy in the front, get his card, and then the guy in the back might be able to help you if you need some help.
The guy in the front sells a product that does a whole monitoring server reporting stuff.
Perfect.
Please get my card.
Perfect. Even better, right? So we get the question a lot. Well, I want to kind of understand the data and I want to write my own queries. Where do I start? Our advice to you is to start with the views. And so what we've listed on here on this slide are the key views in both the CDR database and the QoE database that would help you as a starting point. My recommendation would be to stick to the views as much as you can if you're writing your own reports. Sometimes there's some things in the views that you might not like how they're formatted. You then need to take that, copy that data out, and kind of create your own custom query from it. So understanding, so now now that we've talked about the foundations and how we collect the reports and how it gets inserted, let's talk about some of the foundations of the actual data that you're looking at. So really there's kind of 5 key characteristics of a poor audio call. And these are kind of network-related statistics. There are other characteristics that would kind of class a call as poor audio, or as being a poor call, but these are kind of the network-related impairments that you'd see. So the first one is ratio concealed samples averages. And what we're saying is if that's over 7%, that's a bad thing, right? And what does that mean? That means that I had periods of time where I didn't have the real audio coming through because of packet loss, or it was delayed or whatever, for whatever reason. And your Lync client will make up for those losses, right? So if I have data to here and I have data from here on in, I need to kind of figure out what was in the middle. So I kind of guess and go, well, if it's here and here, I'm going to kind of draw it and fake it. So the more that that's happening, the poorer the audio quality will be. The next one is packet loss rate greater than 10%. Anyone have networks that have packet loss greater than 10%? No. So obviously this number, is kind of a high number. But when you're looking at poor calls, anything that's 10% and above would be really bad. Anything less than 10% is going to be bad, but your users still may not actually notice it that much. Jitter and round trip are also big drivers of poor audio quality calls. So anything over 30 seconds on the jitter side, and any round trips that are over 500 milliseconds. And they're going to kind of manifest themselves differently in the call. So a jittery call is going to sound kind of robotic. You're going to be missing pieces. It's going to sound kind of pieced together. Round trip, you're going to hear it all, but it's just going to be really, really delayed.
So how many people went to the CQM session yesterday? Okay, you may have seen, if we can go back a slide real quick, you may have seen them kind of talk about the things to focus on in these. The ones that we have listed up here are what we use within the reports to kind of determine or classify something as poor quality. If you are looking within your network, you're going to know that there are different characteristics and different SLAs for different parts of your network. Internal and wired, I'm going to want to make sure that I'm having a good experience, so I may actually say I want those to be a little bit less in terms of what I'm looking at. If I'm looking at across a remote connection or across a wireless, then I know that I'm going to have a little bit more packet loss. I might have a little bit more round trip, and so that's going to be okay. And so when you look at the networks that you're working with, you may actually be changing some of these values to make sure that you're giving the best quality of experience. The other thing they probably told you is that there are 3 of these that you really want to focus in on, because 2 of them are kind of calculated averages that are a result of the other 3. So when you're looking at how can I improve my experience, the ones that you really want to look at is packet loss rate, jitter, and round trip. All right, because all of those will affect the other 2 values.
Is that a loss or a subtraction from 5?
Yes. Or wait, is it subtraction from 5 or
subtraction from 4.2, 4.3, depending on if you're on the narrow band or the wide band scale?
Yeah.
Yeah, the degradation, you want the degradation average there to be small, right? Because it's anything over 1 is bad. So you actually want that to be essentially 0, right? And latency is round trip.
Okay.
Yeah, that correlates to round trip. Okay? And again, these are, so when you set up an audio call, right, there's the RTP channel. So we establish the audio port to port. Well, there's also this RTCP channel, or real-time control protocol. We're not actually sending audio down that stream, but we're kind of sending these like handshakes back and forth to say, hey, I've sent you 100 packets. Have you received 100 packets? No, I've only received 99. And it goes on this kind of RTCP channel all the time. And that's what we actually use as the basis for reporting this back in the QoE report. All right. So what can you get from the inbox reports? So we get this question a lot, we've got an issue, do you have logs? Well, no, I didn't have logging turned on. Something just happened. It went kind of haywire. I didn't have client-side logging turned on. Okay, we don't have monitoring server deployed. Can't help you. Not very useful, right? So what we want to do is we now want to be able to walk you through on these slides kind of the starting point, because we get that question a lot, right? Where do I start from? So if a user comes to me with an issue like this, they don't have client-side logs, how can I start to dig into this monitoring server data to figure out what might have happened with that user, or whether or not it's maybe a bigger problem? And like I said before, we collect not only these media quality reports, but we also collect any diagnostic codes. So if a user gets disconnected from a server for a particular reason because media drops or something like that, there's a mid-call failure, we'll actually capture and show you in these reports those diagnostic codes. And it really provides a very objective view of the user's experience, right? Because a lot of times you get the user interpretation of what happened, maybe not a complete story. This is really that objective view. So when you go in, you can go to the user activity report. And when you pull up the user activity report, there's obviously a number of parameters that you can choose. Start date, end date, activity types, which modality you're interested in. And then you can actually enter in a user URI prefix. I was sitting with a customer once, and we said, okay, I'm going to walk you through the data that you have, because they had no clue what data they had available to them. And we walked up, and they were a pretty large company. They had 40,000 users, and he got so excited when he saw this, got to this report, didn't enter a user URI, and hit find. And then we sat, we waited for a couple minutes. We chatted about something else. So I don't suggest that you come here and just hit search without entering a user URI prefix, especially if you have a large environment. You want to put in a user value in there, or something that's identifiable. You can actually search for phone numbers in this. So say you had a report of someone calling in from the PSTN, and you don't really know who they were trying to target because it never ended up getting connected, but you got a report that there was a poor experience. You can actually just enter in the telephone URI that called, and it will find it in addition to your user SIP URIs.
This is querying the QoE database itself, not the spooled up list.
Yeah. So the question that's in the front row is, this is querying the back-end data that's stored in the monitoring database, and that's, yes, it is. Anything that's in the list database that hasn't gotten populated into the back-end database would not show up here.
And what's that period of time? I've had customers call and say, hey, 3 minutes after a call, they went in here and looked, and there wasn't anything there.
Yeah, so
Just give it some time.
yeah, so I have to repeat the questions because there's people that might be watching a recording after. Not that they would watch the recording of the repeat, but whatever. It's kind of weird, right? So the question was, how long is that time? And it shouldn't be, in my experience, it's not 3 minutes. It's something shorter than that, but it also depends on how busy the server is. It depends on how busy the SQL backend is that it's actually being dumped into. 3 minutes seems like a long time. Now, there are some scenarios where we don't actually write the data out because the session hasn't actually ended yet. So say you're in a meeting and you have 3 people in the meeting and everyone just exits out, and no one actually ends the meeting. That data doesn't actually get flushed out and written until that session dies off, right? So you'd actually have to go in and say end meeting. You can also do a list flush. I don't remember the commandlet. There's a, what is it? I don't remember. You can flush the list database as well to tell it to take any sessions that are in there, even though they're not closed out, to force it to write it. Yeah. Typically, what I see in my experience is a peer-to-peer call between 2 endpoints should write right away, because as soon as we hang up, that call's done, right? It's more the conference calls or meetings or something that someone's joined.
The other thing that I've seen, and I admit this is
We'll get to your question.
happened to me before as well, is I'll load up the report and I'll put in today's current time for the end time, and then I'll keep hitting refresh. And the call may have ended, and so I always just go and change the to time to be tomorrow so that I don't have to worry about that. But sometimes the data is there, but because of the way you're loading the data, it doesn't show.
And you get so focused on like, why is list broken, and is the database, and you're looking at event viewer, and then you come back and you go, oh,
Yeah.
change the time. It's a good point.
I was just wondering, what is the
15, 20 minutes?
15, 20 minutes, something like
Yeah.
that. It's a fairly long period of time. I mean, I guess long. Like if you're sitting there waiting for it to show up in the report, it's a long time. If you're not, and it just happens in the background, then it's not that long. So it kind of depends.
We have, whenever we look at these reports, sometimes we have to individually get into every call, and that's a little tedious.
Yeah.
Is there a way to export the whole database into some form of Excel sheet where it's more easily readable?
So her question for the recording is, it's kind of painful sometimes to just loop through every call individually. Do I have some way to export it? So the reports have an export functionality built into them, but in my experience, doing that, it sort of makes it then really hard to follow what's in the actual report, because you just get this kind of data that's disconnected. It's in these lines in Excel, and it doesn't, I don't know. So what my recommendation is, we talked earlier about the views. So that slide that had all the views in it, all those views are basically essentially making up these lists that you see here. So I would go back to those views as your starting point, run them in SQL Server directly, pull that query, and then export it out into an Excel file or something if you wanted to. And then also we'll look later about the health analysis tool that Nick will talk to that shows some of how we pull that data out. It doesn't show maybe exactly what you're looking for, but it's similar, and you could then extend that if you wanted to as well. All right. So questions? No more questions? We're good? Okay. So back to the user activity report. So when you go back here, we filtered. Now I see any calls that are related to this user 29787. Any peer-to-peer call, whether they were the from user or they were the to user, these calls would be listed in there. So when you click through, you can see here on the left-hand side, I have this detail link. This is basically a hot link within the report. I can click on that, and then it takes me to the next step to actually look at the session detail. You can also see here at a very high level which calls we think had a problem with them. Any calls that are green, probably no problems. Any calls that are labeled with a little red icon, there was probably some sort of issue with that call. And they can be reported as red for a couple of reasons. Either one, there was a really poor audio experience or video experience or app and desktop sharing experience, or there was some odd diagnostic code that we've determined that we should flag this as red. So these are just click-throughs. I'm going to kind of run through these pretty quick because we actually have a full report that I'll run through. So you click on the detail, you get the detail, and like I said, we'll kind of go through the detail in a little bit more. But when I get here, I now see I have this kind of session information, I have my media quality report, and I also have these diagnostic reports. And you can see here which of them were reported by the server and which of them were reported by the client. A lot of times they're going to be the same, but sometimes you may get a server reporting an issue because a client got disconnected. Well, a client can't send me that diagnostic code because it wasn't actually able to capture and process it. It just, someone shut their machine off. So sometimes you'll see diagnostic codes reported by both endpoints. Other times you'll see them just reported by the server. And then when you click in on that, question?
So just saying there about the client being disconnected, does the client ever cache any of the information to send up to the server next time it's online?
I've had that question before, and I've never actually sat down to test it in my lab. I don't know exactly. Do you know? Do we cache them?
I don't think so. I know that if it's like a temporary disconnect and it reconnects, then it will go ahead and send that back. But if it's been offline for a while, it restart the client.
Yeah, my guess would be that we don't store them up unless, like Nick said, that reconnecting, I'll reconnect, and then I would actually send.
Client logging turned on locally where it's rolling like full. And
Yeah.
50 megahertz.
Yeah.
Is it written in there when I disconnect?
Certain things would be written in there, right? And certain things that you can see. So in your client cache, there's UCC APL log file, which you can open up in Snooper and you can view. There's the client ETL file in there as well, which you as a regular Lync user can't read. The only people that actually can read those are Microsoft support engineers because they have the correct symbol files to be able to code them and read them. So there's you're unlikely to get client disconnect in the UCC APL log file, because that's really anything that we're sending over that SIP channel gets logged in that file. Whereas there's other stuff that gets logged in the client ETL files.
The other thing to point out is if you look at the bottom of the screenshot, you can see the diagnostic reports. We show you the ones that we got reported by the server and by the client. So if the client isn't able to send, we'll still get kind of the server's view of it.
Server side view. Yeah. And then this is just if I had clicked through on that 503 response code, it would take me through and show me the various components that made that up. Okay, so this was an example of, there was routes available for this request, but no available gateway at this point.
So I actually used this with a customer who had a very hot executive who had a meeting and no one can dial into it. And so when I was working with the customer, I just happened to be there working on a different issue, and so they pulled me into this. I started saying, okay, well, what's going on? Who was calling in? And we went through this exact same process where because no one could get into the meeting, we couldn't kind of look up the conference URI or look at the meeting. And so we went through and we found out one of the cell phone numbers, and we typed it in, and saw the incoming call come in. And we followed this path, and I was able to see in the diagnostic header that they had entered a code, but there was no matching meeting for that code. I thought, okay, so that's kind of strange. Is that a Lync problem or not? And so we went back to the secretary, and we got the actual invite and found out that she had copied, or she had taken a Lync meeting and then typed what she had seen or thought up into kind of the meeting subject, like people are used to kind of dialing conferencing, and she had added an extra digit. So everyone was going through and trying to type in this extra digit, and so we had executives saying, oh, this isn't working, when it was a simple mistake like that. And we were able to prove it to them just by kind of going through the same process and saying, yep, that's that, and we can go back and see exactly what happened.
The message that said the person put in the wrong code was in the monitor server?
Yeah, because we saw the call come in from the cell phone, which means that we could track that whole thing, and we could see that it went to CAA, and that there's a diagnostic code saying someone had entered a code, but they couldn't find a meeting.
And that's a good point, though, because most of the time they look for conversation for the conference.
Yep.
Right. And then they blame it because it never happened.
Right, and in this case, it didn't never happen because it didn't exist. Yeah.
Didn't never happen?
Didn't never happen. It's Canadian, man.
Yeah.
Come on. Hey, does anybody know the score of the hockey game? Can someone look it up, please, for me?
You just went in the recording.
Really? No, seriously, look it up. Because I'm hoping that Canada beats U.S. today, so I can give them a hard time. Yeah, it is going on right now. Okay, so we talked, the last couple slides about, individual calls. So individual user reported an issue. We went in, we found it, whatever, right? We looked at it. Who is that? That's okay. It's just distracting to me. So we went in, found that call, figured out for that particular user what happened. Now the next question is, what's the scope of this problem? Is this widespread in our environment? Are all gateways down? Are all people dialing in, entering extra digits? Right? So we need to actually be able to go back and figure out how big is the scope. 0, 0. Thank you very much. Canada's going to win, so I'm not really worried. So we're back to that peer-to-peer session detail that we were looking at before. And now what you can do is you can click on these diagnostic codes that are shown right here. Instead of before where we clicked on detail, now I actually click on the diagnostic code, and it takes me to more detail about that diagnostic code. So now I can see the impact. So now that I've figured out that I had an issue, now I can go and I can look at the overall impact to my environment of that particular issue. So you can see here that we had 261 reported sessions of this particular diagnostic ID.
The mouse isn't showing with that view.
Sorry. Got it. So I can now, I see the detail of the problem. I can see the, how many reported sessions, and I can also see the trend line on the right-hand side. So if I saw, no diagnostic codes on Monday, no diagnostic codes on Tuesday, Wednesday, boom, 261 sessions, and then back down to nothing on Thursday, that tells me, okay, something's happened, right? I need to go in and figure out what happened in my environment on Wednesday, right? In this case, it's an example of routes being down. Maybe someone pulled a gateway died, something happened, right? So I can go back and look at what the scope of this is.
Or for those who come to your advanced troubleshooting session, it could be an evil administrator.
It could be evil administrator, yes. Nice plug for my next session that I'm going to do in 45 minutes. So then what I can do is I can click on the number of reported sessions. Again, you'll see that's hyperlinkable. Hyperlinkable. It's a hyperlink. I can click onto it, drill down, and now I can start to see these session counts broken out by server, by component, and then more importantly by user down below. So what this now tells me is, oh, I know that I had some users who had a problem, or I had maybe a front-end server that had a problem. So in this example, you'll see seems kind of split across all the front-end servers, so it doesn't seem specific to a particular front-end server, but that might help you narrow down what the problem is and how to be able to fix it. And then also you can see things broken down by user. You can also see, now I got my user list, so now I can go back in and say, hey, we've got this issue, we're aware of it, we're working on it, we just wanted to reach out and tell you what's going on. So I'm actually going to break out of the presentation at this point, and I'm going to show you some examples of these reports.
It's not projecting.
Pardon? It's not projecting.
Yeah, you have to.
All right. Now it's projecting. So this is a peer-to-peer session detail report, and this is just a saved file that we have. We're not actually connected to an environment, so I can't go into the reporting console and kind of click through this for you. But what I did want to go through is to just kind of point out some of the data that's in here that might help you. So obviously I've got all the important stuff. What pool front end was involved, who was the from user, who was the to user in this particular call. I can see the client versions that were involved, right? So user reports an issue. Maybe it's a known issue in a particular release of the Lync client. This now is that, like we said, that objective view of the clients that were involved and the endpoints that were involved. You can also see right here, you can see, oops, bug. Oops, sorry. There we go. All right. Let's try this again. You can see here, where is it?
They can see your mouse on that one since it's on the edge screen.
So from Edge server here, US Edge pool, hadrlab.local. So I can see the Edge server that the user was connected from. I can also see if they were an internal or external user. And that kind of helps you to troubleshoot if you maybe had a problem where if two endpoints are external, call works well. One endpoint's external, one endpoint internal, not going so well. And then as you scroll down here, if you had expanded out the media quality report, this is the kind of visual way that we represent that VQ report that I showed you that we capture on the client. We show it visually here, showing the who called who, the caller endpoint, the callee endpoint, whether or not mediation server bypass was engaged, the various OS, some parameters about the user's computer that they're connected from as well. And then we go down and we actually start to look at some of the media statistics about this call. One thing that's interesting to note here is we'll actually capture whether or not this was a wired or wireless call. So you'll see in here Ethernet or wireless. Sometimes you will see certain wireless network cards that don't actually report properly to the OS that they're wireless. So they will actually show up in this report as Ethernet, so it'll sometimes skew some of the reports. But then you would actually be able to identify that via your IP subnet. So you might be able to look and go, oh, hey, this is reporting as a wired connection, but I know that that's one of my wireless subnets, so you'd have to kind of consider that. We also write in the subnets that are being used here as well. And if we actually have the location information service data populated in my environment, we'll actually pull that out and show you the friendly site and region name here as well. If it's not populated, we just don't show it. Another thing that's nice here is it actually shows me the AV Edge server that was used in the call. Yeah?
What about the VPN? How does it get determined whether it's VPN or?
So again, that's a network card driver. So the network card driver has to report to the OS that it's a VPN driver. I don't know the exact flag that we key off of, but there is a flag in the network card driver at the OS level that tells it whether or not it's VPN. Again, it's incumbent upon the network card driver to report itself properly that it was on VPN. But
We're saying that if we, in the region, we put in the subnet range like 10.0.0.0,
Yeah.
the VPN range, and name it accordingly, the whole region will fill it out that this is a VPN range.
Yeah, we do see a lot of people doing things like that specifically for that purpose. Because I have seen quite a few like SSL VPNs that don't set that flag. And so when you see the caller VPN in this, it just says false. And so we do recommend that when people have that they start looking at the actual subnets.
yeah, good question.
Can you scroll back up, direct and relay?
Oh, yeah, so direct and,
And TCP, so UDP failed, I would assume, something like that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what he's pointing out here is the caller connectivity, right? I knew whether or not there was a direct connection or a relay connection as well. So it tells me, yeah, there was an edge server involved, and I know that we were relaying, and like you said, the transport in this call was TCP, right? So I would have probably expected that to be a pretty poor audio quality call.
You were talking before about having the client and the server report
Yeah.
coming in. Is that calling report received? Would that show false if the client had disconnected and couldn't send?
Yeah, exactly.
Find it?
Yeah, so his question was, if the client got disconnected and was unable to send the VQ report at the end, because we just, I didn't actually end my call, I just kind of closed my laptop lid, so I didn't actually generate it and send it. Yeah, you're right, you would see callee report received false there, and you would see half, not all the time half of the data, but the parts that we can't make up from the callee side would just not be listed in the report.
So since the transport is TCP, we should assume that there's a problem because UDP couldn't get negotiated.
I would assume that there was some sort of issue negotiating UDP, yeah.
And what about ICE warning? I've seen a lot of reports where ICE warning flag is enabled, but I couldn't understand what ICE warning is.
I don't actually, do I have the tooltip on this one? I don't actually know what that one, what it would actually, do you even know what it would write in there on a?
I don't think I've seen it.
No, I don't, sorry, I don't know.
ICE is going to be your negotiation.
Right.
TCP, everything else, right?
Yeah, via the edge.
Yeah, I don't know what we'd write in there from an ICE warning.
Well, and this is always seems a little confusing to me too. Your left hand, your caller says direct, but I think that guy's on your edge, right? Connected.
Oh, no, scroll down.
This guy, so main audio, caller on the left and callee on the right.
Yep.
Callee says relay, but based on the fact that you pulled the internal location information, it seems like he's an inside caller.
He is an inside caller.
The caller is connected remotely in his home network to the edge.
Yep.
Why does one say direct and one says relay? What is relay if you're internal?
So if you're,
I mean, that should have been a direct connection client to client because the edge is not shuffled media anyway, right?
no, it is when you have, so if you have one user outside and one user inside, they can't connect directly, right? So we,
So the edge in the relay case, the edge is relaying the TCP packets for the
from the internal user, yeah, so the internal user sends its data to the edge, the external user connects directly to the edge, and then the edge rendezvous. Okay? Scrolling down, you can see the AV edge servers that each caller connected to, right? So I can see the AV edge IP address. I can also see the port that was negotiated for that particular call, which can be helpful in trying to troubleshoot. So like you guys pointed out, this one was a TCP call, right? Why was UDP blocked? So we need to kind of figure out why we couldn't negotiate UDP in that case. Yeah, question?
Is there something meaningful in the fact that the edge server used by the callee and caller are different?
So his question is there something meaningful in the fact that there's two different AV edges used? So when a client connects to an AV edge pool, right, it can get either one. So if caller A gets this edge and caller B gets this edge, then the media will actually traverse across the two edges. or it doesn't have to, right? Because if the outside caller can get to my edge over here, the media will go there. But that's where I got my media relay port from, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that we use those media relay ports. It's just that that's where those two callers got their media relay ports from in that particular case. We can see the capture devices. So this obviously is a lab, so we're using this little device driver called the virtual audio cable. But if this had been a real client endpoint, you would actually be able to see what capture device. So users calling in, are you using a supported headset? Yeah, of course I am. I always do it. No, you're really using your laptop mic, right? And I can see that right here. And then scrolling down, we can see these caller and callee client events. So anyone ever get the little yellow bar in their Lync client, right? You're in a room, you're causing echo, it might sound like howling monkey, something like that. All of those messages, those user-facing diagnostics, are driven based on these caller and callee events, right? So if someone said, hey, I was in a call and a little yellow bar popped up, I don't really know what it said, I didn't screenshot it or whatever, you can come here to this report and you can see what was actually causing a problem.
Do you get any of that information from the local client logs?
Sorry?
Well, it's
My back, sorry. It happens every once in a while. So your question?
Can you get any of this information from the local client logs?
Do you want to answer that one?
sure. For recording purposes,
Yes.
the question was, can you get any of this information from the local client logs? When we showed you a little bit before how the client sends this stuff back up, if you look at the local UCC API log and you search for the term VQ report, which stands for Voice Quality Report, you'll see after every call we send an XML file with that information. And so what you will see is that client's reporting back of exactly what you see in here.
So the actual user-facing diagnostic, though, when we show that to the user, we wouldn't write that into the UCC API log file at that time. It would only be, like Nick said, in the VQ report after the result of that would be written. Now, that user-facing diagnostic, I'm sure, is probably logged in the ETL file that's in that same tracing directory. But again, unless you have symbols to decode those ETL files, you can't view them. So,
Are the triggers for these pop-ups documented anywhere?
so if you hover over one of these items here, it gives you the description of it, but it doesn't actually have the documentation there to tell you at what number or percent or whatever that we would pop that user-facing diagnostic. And I don't believe that that's...
For most of them, if not all, I believe if you go and you look on the TechNet schema for the QE database, and you go and you search for whatever that name is, in the description it'll tell you what the healthy values are or where it triggers.
So then, continuing on, so there's some more information here on the actual audio stream, caller to callee, and then we also have the audio stream callee to caller. A couple interesting things that we show in here. We actually show the codec, right? So when an audio call is established, I can negotiate multiple codecs. It's like when I have a conversation with Nick. We can speak English, we can speak French, and we can speak Spanish. We negotiate that when we start our conversation, but then during the conversation, we can dynamically switch from English to Spanish, from Spanish to French, whatever. And your Lync clients do that as well. So they negotiate multiple codecs, and then they dynamically use those codecs based on network characteristics of the call. What we report here is the last codec that was used in that conversation. So if you're actually looking at a call at like the network level, you can see that call go, starts with RT audio, maybe switches to 711, and then back to RT audio, 711, back to RT audio. Whatever codec was used when we finished the call is the codec that gets reported there. We also report forward error correction. Anybody know what forward error correction is?
It's a bit known for basically, anticipating if there's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. So she said basically forward error correction kicks in if I anticipate there's a problem. So if I'm sending packets and I'm finding out from my other endpoint that those packets aren't being delivered, right? They're being dropped, and I at the same time sense that I have enough bandwidth, I'll start to double up my packets, right? Forward error correction. Anticipating that they're going to drop one, and hopefully they don't drop the second one, hopefully the second one shows up. So forward error correction has kicked in on your client, typically because of high packet loss. we would actually log that here and say audio FEC true. And you would probably also, if that was set to true, you would probably also see a high packet loss rate. And you can see things like jitter and round trip and burst density. And I'm not going to go into all of them. If you want to go and learn more about them, you can kind of hover over here, or like Nick said, this documented in the TechNet schema. Okay, and then at the bottom we have the various diagnostic codes as reported by the server in this case. Questions on that? Cool. So now I'm going to go and I'm going to flip over to the conference detail report. One of the customers that I worked with, we got called in. They had a few issues. One really big issue, though, was, again, kind of a CEO related. The CEO was in a Lync call, and he reported that, Lync is broken, right? The world came crashing down to a halt because Lync is broken in his mind. He had been on a call, he got disconnected, and he couldn't get reconnected. Okay, that's pretty bad. We got called in after the fact. It was, 2-3 weeks later. Started working with the team that managed Lync, and I said, okay, do you have monitoring server deployed? Yeah, great. Okay, let's go. Let's figure out what was the date, time, who was the organizer. So went into the user activity report, entered the organizer SIP URI, saw a list of 5 or 6 conferences, and they went, it's that one. It was Tuesday morning or whatever. And so we looked at it, and what we found out was that the CEO had dialed in, right, and 4 or 5 other people had dialed in from Lync. He had dialed in through PSTN dial-in conferencing from his mobile phone in the hotel. He dialed in, they had a call for about 35 minutes. His mobile phone dropped the call for whatever reason. Lync didn't, and we could see there was no diagnostic code sent from the server saying, disconnecting the endpoint. The call just dropped, right? You're in a cell phone, you're in a hotel, it happens. He then dialed back in 3 minutes later, and there was no audio. Why? Everyone had left the meeting, right? So in the time that he got disconnected, because he hadn't maybe realized right away that he was disconnected, because I think he was talking. So he got disconnected, looked down on his phone, oh, I'm disconnected, dialed back in, and in that 3 minutes of him being, figuring out how to get back in, the call had ended because they were done. So everyone else that was on the audio bridge disconnected. And we could see that in this conference report. And I could go back to their team and say at 8:45 he dropped, at 8:46 everyone else in the meeting dropped normally, right? Lync didn't fall down, Lync didn't die. Everyone just left the meeting. We could see all the bye messages. We could see, it looked great for everyone else. 2 minutes later, he dialed back in, and he was there by himself. So Lync was working. There was audio. There was a conference. He was just the only one there. So we were actually able to take that and go back to their team and show them that particular example that they could then take and leverage and kind of, debug these issues. Yeah?
If you see the user agent, there are multiple places where it says specifically Microsoft Lync 2010.
Yeah.
And there is Microsoft Lync. That means there are multiple clients involved in this conference.
Yes.
Does that pose an issue?
Does it pose, so her question is, we're referencing in the user agent string Microsoft Lync 2010 as well as Microsoft Lync. And your question is, does it pose an issue that there were mixed versions in a conference?
Yes.
No. That's fully from a supportability perspective, it's fully supported to have mixed versions of clients. You wouldn't want to see 3 versions in there. We wouldn't want to see Office Communicator, Lync 2010, and Lync 2013. But yeah, no, it's definitely supported to have.
Is it true that if I'm connecting via 2010 and 2013 client into a conference, 2013 will send 2 different versions of stream. One is RT video and one is which is compatible with 2010. It basically adds a little more to the bandwidth.
So your question is it about a Lync 2013 client joined to a 2010 meeting or to a 2013 meeting?
2010, that's it.
So a 2013 client joined to a 2010 meeting would still only send RT video. It wouldn't send the other video type because that AVMCU doesn't understand it. It's only when we're in the 2013 conference that the 2013 clients would send multiple video streams so that the AVMCU could send the RT video stream to the Lync 2010 client, but also the H.264 to Lync 2013 client. Okay?
Silly question, I could probably look myself, but does it report mobile clients as
We had that question yesterday, and we didn't, unfortunately, get a chance to go and test it. I believe that the way that the mobile client shows up is it looks something similar to this, but then in the user agent string, it actually tells you the mobile OS, so whether it was iPad or iPhone or Windows Phone. But we don't have an example of it. Yeah, it should show the difference between whether it was a iPad as a tablet or the phone. Yeah. Should. Sorry? How about Skype clients? No. I mean, the Skype client can't natively join a Lync conference, right?
On a peer-to-peer, though.
On a peer-to-peer, right? But the Skype client think of the Skype client as like a federated user sitting out in its own environment. It would never send a report back to my server, right? It would always be on the federated side.
Server side, you would see a federated join.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Skype client can't actually join the meeting, but in a peer-to-peer call, I would see that the other endpoint was a federated.
Similar to what you see in peer-to-peer Lync federation with a company.
Yeah, exactly.
The conference announcement service
Yep.
pages, am I going to see one of those for every time conference announcement does something?
No, so you would see a conference announcement service join the meeting and then should stay in the meeting, but this one didn't actually look like it. At start time, it was actually not there at all. I'm not sure why that doesn't make sense to me. It should have stayed in there. You know?
I don't.
Don't know. Yeah, these reports were taken from a large set of anonymized data that was kind of old. So anyways, we're in the top section, we're going to show conference participation, so who the user was, when they joined, when they left, the user agent that they were using, and then we also break it down by modality. So at the top, I showed that someone joined and that they left, and then further on down, I actually show the modalities that they used when they were there and the join and leave time of each individual modality. So I can see when they joined and when they left each individual modality. And again, from here, I can click through and click on media quality or detail on any of the diagnostics. Yep.
In the calls between Lync and Skype, even peer-to-peer, Skype presents technical call info on a semi-real-time basis. Are they tied? Are they using the same statistics from Lync at this point, or vice versa?
So you mean if I'm in a Skype call and I get that little, elevator kind of looking thing with a gauge on it to tell me that there's a network?
No, they have a technical call info. It's basically a monitoring report.
Yeah.
Similar to this, but it's semi-real time.
So is your question have we kind of merged any of that technology into Lync yet?
Are they, if we're in a call, is the data being reported across, so is Lync, if I'm looking at a Skype technical call info, is it accurate?
So with any media stream sending back and forth, we're always going to have that RTCP control conversation going on in the back end, no matter who we're talking to, including a Skype client. So from our end, we'll be able to get our reports and our perception of the call. The Skype client sending us his perception of the call would go off into how Skype collects that, and that would be a scenario in which if you go look at the report, you'd see that we received a report from our Lync client, but we didn't receive a report from the other end. So we'll still have an idea of how the quality of the call was, but we
only from
won't
the one
necessarily
direction.
get it from that end.
Yeah, only one direction. And the thing with the Skype Federation calls is we don't actually connect direct, right? So if you had a Skype client on your laptop and you have a Lync client on your laptop, the media wouldn't flow directly between the two of them. There's some back-end stuff that helps to do that.
Well, in V1.
In V1.
In V1.
Yeah.
In V2, yeah, we'll be able to have the direct.
Okay. So any other questions on any of that? If not, I'll move back to the presentation. Cool.
So life outside the inbox reports. We've been showing you everything that you kind of get just by deploying the SSRS reports. It looked like we had quite a few people who went to the CQM session yesterday. For those of you who weren't there, one of the challenges that we've seen when we worked with kind of some of our larger customers who are really getting deep into ensuring that they're having the best call quality was how do they dig into that? Where do they see where they want to make the biggest investments? And so my team has been working with core engineering to come up with kind of a methodology of how you're able to go in and kind of target those areas. This methodology includes some custom SQL queries that ship with the networking guide. You can go and download them today and run them. And included in there is an entire appendix talking about what CQM is and how to use it. Essentially, they kind of break things up into different levels, starting with the server, making sure the server's healthy, then looking at the transport between you and the client, and then also looking kind of at the client to see, what could be those causes of poor quality. It's not always network, as much as sometimes people like to blame the network team. It's not always that. It could be devices, it could be configuration, it could be device drivers. And so this methodology is designed to help you kind of go through that process of, okay, where do I start? Where do I look? How do I attack those areas where I'm going to get the biggest bang for my buck? What you see up here is actually the game. You've probably seen a lot of people walking around with kind of these posters. They're handing them out downstairs. I think they still have some left at the expo hall.
They did yesterday.
This is a game in which you can play. It's very much like a children's game from the U.S., but it requires 3 players. It requires your Lync admin, your network admin, and your telephony admin. And all the different steps that they need to take to ensure that everything's kind of working well and that you're going through and having a good understanding of what's happening in your environment. So you can grab a poster downstairs, or you can go to TechNet, download it. There are playing cards. I think we had some guys in MSIT that actually kind of had fun playing this game. I'd expect you to have fun as well, though. So if you have any questions about CQM, I can obviously try and answer them here. Otherwise, I know that we have Brandon Jens and Andrew that will be kind of down around the expo area that can help you as well. Okay.
Next one.
Yes. The next thing is a health analysis tool. And this is something that we shipped with originally the Pilot Success Kit that's kind of been rebranded as the Rollout and Adoption Success Kit. We kind of refer to it as RASC. When you're looking at your environment, a lot of people tend to focus just at call quality. But you also want to understand what your service reliability is and what are those things that are most impacting your user's experience. And so in this health analysis tool, it's just an Excel spreadsheet where you can go in and put in the SQL server and database and kind of a date range of things that you want to look at. And I'll go out and I'll kind of collect all this information and report back to you kind of your session success rate. And you can define your levels of, what's gold, what's silver, what's bronze, what are my SLAs and what level of service do I want to make sure that I provide to my users. In this tool, it will go through and look at your total number of sessions and then also look at those sessions that ended in an unexpected failure code. We kind of have the idea of expected failure codes, which could be someone from a cell phone just hanging up. We don't want to report every time that happens, otherwise you guys will always be looking at it. But unexpected failure code is something terminated unexpectedly. And so we kind of look at the ratio between that and total sessions to come up with this reliability report. After yesterday's session, I had someone come up and say, hey, I ran 2 different reports, one on the monitoring server and one in this tool. They gave me kind of different session counts. Why is that? One of the things that we've done in this tool is that we want to really get an idea of the user's reliability. And so we kind of strip out all those different sessions that might be happening in terms of synthetic transactions and kind of monitoring stuff, because those can change actually what your percentage is. So we wanted to see what it would be from a user perspective. If you are not quite meeting your goals, you can go to one of the following pages where you can actually kind of drill down and say, okay, what happened during this time period? Why was it that I had a spike in, or I had a dip in my session reliability for a particular modality. And in there, you can see kind of a graph, and you see when things were happening. But from there, you can kind of also filter and see during the week how many occurrences did I have a specific diagnostic ID. And that will help me to understand, okay, if I've had a spike in unreliability of a particular modality, what caused that spike? And if I can see there's all because of this diagnostic ID, then I know that that's where I want to start focusing in on and where I can go to fix it and restore my reliability.
You can also take those diagnostic codes back into the monitoring server reports directly themselves, search for the diagnostic code, and kind of go through it that way as well.
And then finally, my team's been working on an adoption dashboard. This has not been released yet. I know Mark and Amy talked about it last night in an adoption session. This will be released with the RASC soon. And this is just a kind of another view in looking at how you're doing on adoption with your thresholds. So it'll give you, the total number of registered users within that time, how many have, sent IMs or joined meetings, or how many conferencing minutes you're having. So this kind of will help you to understand how well it's being adopted, what your trend lines are, and if it's helping you to make sure that you're getting a return on investment for the Lync server. Okay.
Yeah, that's coming soon, right?
Yes, coming soon.
Cool.
Well, I could have posted a really long view, but yeah, it's a single sheet. But when you scroll down, you'll see all the statistics for different modalities, peer-to-peer and conference, including the amount of minutes that have been used. And then I also don't want to forget, especially since we have one sitting in the front row, these are things that we have released. We have numerous partners who have developed solutions. I don't want to name all those because I'm sure that I will forget someone, but we do have numerous partners in this space as well.
So there's a question in the back?
Yes?
For 2010 and 2013, or just?
This one will be 2013, and we'll look at taking it back to 2010. The health analysis tool works for both 2010 and 2013.
Does this have anything for federated users?
No. No, we don't have anything for federated.
And I mean, basically what this is a packaged up, kind of customized SSRS reports that you would then deploy. So if there was some component that you wanted to add into it, you're going to get the SSRS report. You could then take it, copy it, extend it, do whatever you would like to. All right, that's the end of our session. So we kind of went through the fundamentals. We talked about the data that's there, some ways that you can use it, and then some other things that you can do kind of outside the built-in reports. Any other questions? Cool. All right, so thanks everyone for coming. I hope you enjoy the rest of what's left. I think there's, one session left, and
Yep.
I'm in it.
If you guys like us, advanced troubleshooting, next session.
Yeah, and
Where's it
please
at?
do your evals. We do read them. We take your feedback, and we kind of adopt and modify our sessions based on it. So thanks.